Morning, everybody. I'm Director Tom Hackney, Director of Investigations and Homeland Security for the Sheriff's Office. It's a follow-up news conference regarding the officer-involved shooting that we had yesterday, Sunday, March 29th, 2015, at 5020 Cleveland Road. The Sheriff's Office received two separate 911 calls, one at 8:47 and one at 8:49 yesterday morning. The first 911 call, I'm going to play you here in 1 second, but there's some excerpts that I wanted to give out. This is from I'm not going to release the information for the caller, but this is from an unrelated caller in the apartment complex who had some thoughts about the argument that she was hearing. And she said, "There's a man, he's irate. I swear he's in there beating the hell out of this girl. He's put the kids outside and he's beating her. Now he's got her locked in the house. It looks like they're fighting. He's just hollering and screaming at the top of his lungs. It looked like he just went in there and hit that girl, and he's jumping on her." I'm going to play it now, and I'll also release a copy of it to you so you can use that at your discretion, and hopefully it will play where you can hear it. So, okay.
That's listen. In Cleveland Mall, apartment building. If I'm not mistaken, y'all need to call. It's the man, he's irate, and so he should have been sitting outside on the steps, and I swear he ended up beating the hell out of this girl. I don't know him, but I'm calling him. Y'all need to come out here. I'll say black right here, Senate, ma'am. We're black. Okay, so he's beating the mom up inside to put the kids out. So he gonna put the kids outside and he's beating her.
Okay, that call goes on for several minutes. Again, I'll release a copy of that to the news media. That way you can use that if you see fit. 2 minutes later, at 8:49, the Sheriff's Office received another 911 call. That call is from a cell phone with no name or location given. We believe it to be suspect Jones's cell phone, although we haven't been able to exactly confirm that. It's real hard to decipher, and you can hear very high emotions, a lot of hollering and screaming. And there's some incident talk about what we feel like this incident and the argument and fight was probably over about children in custody and those sort of things. I'll release that to you as well, and I won't play it in here now because it is very hard to decipher. Because of those two 911 calls, the Sheriff's Office dispatches two officers to that. The first officer who was dispatched is 20-year veteran Officer Mike McKinley, and the second officer that was dispatched, released yesterday, is Officer Clifford Sames. All right, so the first officer to arrive is Officer McKinley. McKinley pulls up in the parking lot of the apartment complex and actually can hear the disturbance from downstairs outside of his car, goes to the apartment where he was dispatched and can hear, again, the disturbance on the inside. Concerned, obviously, for the safety of the woman who, that information that you just heard, and I read you some of those, believe that the battery is occurring. He makes entry into the apartment. As Officer McKinley makes entry into the apartment, in the back bedroom, he finds a suspect, Jones, sitting on top of the victim, strangling her. Officer McKinley gives directions to that suspect to stop. He does. Suspect stops strangling her. He gives him other directions to get off of the woman, which he does. At or about that same time is when Officer Sames arrives. Here's a disturbance, goes inside as well. McKinley is holding Jones at taser point. He has not deployed his taser at that time, but is utilizing his taser as cover in case he needs to deploy it for the woman's safety. That time, they make the decision to make the arrest for the battery on the victim. They're going to move in and handcuff Jones. Officer Sames is the handcuffing officer and moves in to place him in restraints. At that point in time, the resistance that Jones begins and continues to show is when it starts. He's not able to be handcuffed, begins to fight and tussle with Officer Sames. They make a decision at that point in time that they need to utilize their electronic control devices or their taser. Officer McKinley attempts to fire his taser and hit the suspect. He's not able to do so. The taser strikes the door frame. The suspect gets up and continues to runs out of the apartment with Officer Sames chasing him on foot. Officer Sames makes an attempt to use his taser and deploys his taser. However, his taser as well strikes the door this time. As the suspect flees the apartment, he shuts the door behind him. The taser probe strikes the door, and he continues out the apartment. Sames is on foot behind him, all this time giving loud verbal directions to stop and comply with the orders to be arrested. At that time, obviously, Jones is technically under arrest. He's just not in custody. He flees out the apartment, down the stairs, and goes around the back of the building. Officer Sames on foot, again, all this time while he's running, shouting to him to stop. You're under arrest for asking him to comply. Makes the corner and comes around to the front of another building. Officer Sames then sees Jones at the front door of another apartment. Jones is beating on that door. Sames then sees Jones kick in the front door of that apartment. Makes entry into that apartment. Sames goes to that door, tries to make entry. The door is closed from behind. He continues his efforts to get inside and is able to get inside. There he finds the woman of the apartment who lives there. She has a 12-year-old child, an 11-year-old child, and an 8-year-old child in her living room with her. She explains that the man who she doesn't know but maybe recognizes from the complex made entry into her apartment, asked her for help, and then when she heard that the officer was at the door, he fled out the back door. Sames continued through her apartments and fled out the back door, chasing Jones again. He goes to another building in the complex, 3 buildings in a row, the last building on the end. Suspect makes the corner with Sames following behind him. Sames, again, giving loud directions for him to stop and comply. Obviously, he doesn't do so. He rounds the corner of the building where Sames finds him knocking on another door, or beating on another door of an apartment towards the front. Sames, fearing that the suspect Jones may do the same thing that he did to the woman and her children and make entry into her apartment, decides that he is going to deploy his taser at the suspect to effect his arrest. Sames deploys his taser, and he believes from Sames' statement that he struck Jones with the taser, and Jones either fought through the tase or it didn't have its full effect like he thought it would. As he tased him, he decided to go in, move in, and make the physical arrest and attempt to handcuff the suspect. As he did so, the suspect began to fight violently, was able to disarm Officer Sames from his taser. The suspect took full control of the taser and turned that taser towards Officer Sames. Officer Sames, obviously in fear that if that taser would be used against him, it could possibly disable him, allowing Jones to gain access to his firearm. Certainly wouldn't want that to happen. Sames being in fear, pulled his issued Glock handgun and fired 6 times, striking Jones approximately 4 times in the arms, legs, and torso. This disables Jones at that time. Sames goes to his police car, takes his issued first aid kit, which he supplemented, goes back and tries to provide first aid to Mr. Jones until Jacksonville Fire Rescue shows up. They transport him to UF Health, where he was taken to surgery yesterday, and last check this morning, he is in stable condition and is expected to fully recover. Mr. Jones has been charged with battery, domestic violence, burglary to an occupied structure, battery on a law enforcement officer, and resisting arrest with violence. Mr. Jones has a history of domestic battery against the victim in this case, where we initially went to conduct the investigation. Sames was not injured during this. Luckily, he was placed on administrative leave, which is kind of per our policy. In watching some of the news media outlets yesterday, it was learned that the victim of the domestic battery went forward to say that the police account of the strangulation is not as it occurred. This was clearly witnessed by Officer McKinley when he first made entry into that apartment. It's not surprising that we have victims of domestic battery change their story or do things to protect their batterers. As sad and unfortunate as that is, the state attorney's office will still work through many cases where they don't have victims' cooperation to ensure that domestic batterers are prosecuted. In many cases, we do not find ourselves dissuaded by a victim's change in story, being aware that sometimes those victims of domestic battery do make those changes. Another thing that was noticed yesterday at the news media when we talked about Officer Sames this is his 3rd officer-involved shooting incident. The first was in 2008. A couple of the news media outlets yesterday mentioned that Officer Sames was injured in that 2008 incident. You know, I arrested a guy in 1995, and in doing so, I twisted my knee. I was injured during that. When Sames was injured in 2008, he was shot in the shoulder while performing his job by somebody who wouldn't comply with his orders to be taken into custody. That's quite a bit different from being injured during an incident. I said it yesterday, I'll say it today. Mr. Jones had multiple opportunities to comply. At the first chance that he had to comply, he got off of the victim in this domestic battery case. We didn't even use a taser at that point in time at his first level of compliance. When he stopped complying and started resisting, our response changed. Our first method of force that we used in this case was a less lethal force of our taser. That is an attempt to not injure the suspect, an attempt to not injure the officers. Again, I said this yesterday, every incident that a police officer is involved in is an armed incident. We carry that arm with us. Everything that we do has a firearm involved in it. We are taught at the police academy to keep our weapons during struggles. Weapon retention is something that quite a bit of time is spent on, and the fear of having your firearm taken is one that many officers deal with when they have these struggles. I mentioned yesterday that 2 separate investigations get done in these use of force cases. The state attorney's office will have a separate investigation conducted, as well as JSO criminal investigation into this. After the criminal investigation is concluded, we do an administrative investigation into the case, where a response to resistance board is held. 5 senior officers from the sheriff's office review that and make a recommendation to the sheriff as to the result of the response to resistance. Can answer some questions if anybody has them.
Ben Becker, Action News. What about the discussion of body cameras and officers that could hopefully clear up any kind of inconsistencies in stories that we're seeing with what happened yesterday?
Well, what you call an inconsistency, I don't see.
Well,
I see
based from the victim who says one thing in the report that says something else, would body cameras help clear everything up?
You know, the sheriff, he did a live call-in show on the 26th of this month where he addressed the body camera issues. It shouldn't be any surprise that people don't call the police to their kids' birthday parties, that people don't call the police when it's a good time to celebrate an anniversary. They call when they're arguing with their family members. They call when, when they're at their worst. There are privacy issues that arise from body cameras. The sheriff addressed this and really outlined that quite well. Force Science Institute, their website has some explanation as to 10 reasons why body cameras aren't as effective as people think they are. And it's outlined there. The sheriff referred actually people to that website during his 26th address there. And I really would, if there's further questions about that, I think his explanation is quite good with that. And again, I'll point out that what you say is discrepancies. I have a 20-year veteran officer who tells me what he saw. I believe him. Haley, please.
Hey, Dr. Hackney. I was just wondering if Katrina, in her initial statement, did she say she was being strangled?
She was less than cooperative at first. She claimed that she was pushed in the face by him. She didn't have a whole lot to say about the strangulation, and as the day went through, she became less cooperative. Again, it's very sad when you see these kind of things. Again, just like I said before, I believe my 20-year veteran officer when he says he saw this woman being strangled. And if she's not in a position that she can look out for her best interest, then we will. Her life matters to us. Her continued placement in that environment matters to us, and we're going to act accordingly.
Director Hackney, did Jones actually come in possession of Officer Sames' taser? You mentioned that confrontation. Did he actually gain physical possession of it?
Yeah, Roger. He was able to actually take that taser from him during that physical confrontation, and that's, I can tell you, I've personally been tased, and it's not something I would stand in line to do again. Knowing what it does to you physically, you have the ability to have your firearm taken during that time that you could be physically incapacitated by that taser, and that obviously probably be what Officer Sames feared. The need to use deadly force arises at that time.
Could you speak to what officers face, especially in domestic situations, because anything can happen?
Yeah, that is one of the most dangerous calls that police officers not just in Jacksonville, but around the country, are dispatched to. That is a completely volatile situation from both the aggressor and the victim in those cases. You never know when a victim may see their future changing immediately when the police are called. Like I said, there's always guns involved because we bring them, but you're going into a residence, there's knives involved, there could be guns in the house. It's an overall very dangerous, very volatile situation that police officers are placed into.
Larry Spurl with Action News. When Katrina was being interviewed, were there any signs, physical signs of her strangulation or of marks to her face to back up her story?
There weren't any outward signs by the time that we got to the ability to photograph them if they were there. With the officer involved shooting happening right then, obviously the police focus and attention turned towards putting Jones into custody. Some of those marks that we have fade quickly. And it appears that could be the case in here. Again, I'm not going to sit here on the news and question a victim of a domestic battery. I don't know what that woman goes through and has gone through with him before. Obviously, with the previous domestic violence history against Jones, there's things that she's gone through, and that may have an influence to her decision to change her story or not claim to be a victim of what the officer saw. Again, that, like I said it before, it's unfortunate. Her life matters to the sheriff's office. I don't know if that addresses your question, but.
Director Hackney, how many loads were in that taser?
Well, we carry a cartridge on the taser. We have an extra cartridge, but it's also important to note that that taser can be utilized either with or without a cartridge in a touch stun mode, and it provides the same level of effectiveness even without a cartridge. Cartridge just gets you distance, and the probes just get you distance from the taser, but the same level of effectiveness is utilized even at a close range.
Were all the loads gone by the time it got in the suspect's hands?
Yes, yes.
So the suspect, how far away was the suspect from the officer at that time?
He was close enough to him to take it from his hands. So he is right there in a physical altercation and struggle with him over that. Again, putting the officer's firearm right there in the struggle and the taser right there in the struggle. I don't think Officer Sames, as I wouldn't want to sit around there and see what Mr. Jones wanted to do with that taser. I'm not going to stick around for that. I wouldn't expect Officer Sames to do that. That ramps things up. It moves it from an incident of maybe I can use open-handed force to get him under control to the fact that he's now armed with something that can incapacitate me and find me without my gun, and I'm going to be armed in an armed confrontation.
During the training at Times Union, were both cartridges used? Both have been deployed, both of the cartridges?
Yes.
And so when Jones had the taser, it would still be effective in the stun mode, but there were no cartridges that could be fired.
Correct. Yeah, the Officer Sames deployed one cartridge in the apartment that stuck in the door, and then the second one was the one he deployed in front of the apartment. When he went in to make the physical arrest, that's where he was disarmed.
And there are two probes at each cartridge. I mean, that's a cartridge fires, there's two leads,
Correct.
and then that cartridge is expired.
That cartridge is expired, but even with, like I said before, even with the cartridge expired but still on the gun, still on the taser can still be utilized in a touch stun mode, with delivering the same level of effectiveness. Haley?
Haley, Channel 4. For people who don't understand your training, can you explain why a taser was used instead of a gun? Is it because initially the suspect wasn't armed before he had a hold of his taser?
Right, yesterday when we were out there are several of the protesters that we heard, don't shoot to kill, don't shoot to kill. Not a single police officer puts on their uniform in the morning and decides, you know what, today I'm going to go out and kill somebody. That seems like a good thing to do. We want the least level of force possible. I want to be able to go to somebody and say, you're under arrest, put your hands behind your back, and they do it. Because then I don't get injured and they don't get injured. I certainly don't want to be injured. None of the police officers who work here want to be injured in effecting an arrest. Ask for compliance, you get the compliance, nobody gets hurt. So in that incident there, where he is physically harming a woman, they're using the taser somewhat as a threat. Hey, if you don't stop what you're doing, I'm going to tase you. in many cases, that's enough of a threat to say, okay, you got me, doesn't feel good, I don't want to be tased. So the level of force that we use, including just simple presence, when a police officer shows up in uniform, that's some level of force there. It's our presence in many cases is enough to ramp things down. As that doesn't work and becomes less effective, we move up a continuum of the level of force that we use. When he began to fight and struggle with the officers to place him under arrest and the handcuffs in the apartment, well, the next step that we're going to use is some form of control. A less lethal taser is the next level that we can use that can, as safely as possible, effect that arrest without injuring us, without injuring the suspect.
Ben Becker, Action News. Again, you guys take an abundance of caution in making arrests and using firearms. Are you concerned in the climate that's developed out of Ferguson that it's possible officers could start getting gun shy in employing methods needed to make an arrest because of concerns of outside of the current situation?
I hate to address Ferguson issues here in Jacksonville. We have a completely different climate here in Jacksonville, and the relationship that the sheriff's office has with all members of the community is, I believe, different than anywhere else in the country. The level of communication that we share, the sheriff's office shares with every segment of our community is different. That addresses half of what you're saying, and certainly I wouldn't want any law enforcement officer anywhere to hesitate to the point that they find themselves in a position where they've been hurt by some mental fear of using force could lead to this, that, or whatever. The use of force, including the taser, including and especially the use of deadly force, officers give such great deference to the fact that they have the ability to take someone's life and in seconds, not minutes, seconds. This whole thing yesterday probably, if you were able to get a stopwatch and watch it, occurred in less than 2 seconds when it came to the use of force, the use of deadly force there. A split-second decision is made by these officers. You've got to protect yourself. You've got to protect the community, the others. Officer Sames knew that this suspect yesterday is a threat to the community. How did he know that? Because he watched him go into somebody else's apartment where he didn't live. Now, he didn't do anything in there, but that was because Sames was behind him. Sames then sees him trying to do the same thing in another apartment. So you start adding all these building blocks up as a police officer to know that this guy's a danger. This guy is dangerous to me and to others. And all those things are pieces of a puzzle that you're putting together within seconds, milliseconds, about the use of deadly force.
There's a community protest at 6 o'clock tonight. What kind of police presence will be there?
You know, we talk about the protest. Thank God I live in America. Thank God I have a right to protest. These folks out there protesting today, we, the sheriff's office, will do everything in our power to protect their right to protest. Now, do that peaceably, do that without blocking roadways. We're all behind you, 100%. And if you're going to protest what the sheriff's office has done, we're okay with that too. You're still employing your right to protest. We're going to protect that. It doesn't matter what you're protesting. Thank God you have a right to do it, and we will protect that right.
Larry Spruill at Action News. Do you think that what happened yesterday has affected or will raise the tensions in that area when it comes to the community and JSO?
Well, it's obvious that it kind of already has. The thing that is concerning is that when some of the information that gets out, it gets out of me making a statement yesterday in a 1 second or 2 second blurb. Facts, the only thing that you can beat Reddit with is facts. I spoke for 14 minutes yesterday just about walking through every level of facts about this case. That information out there to the public is smart. They can see this as what it is. It is somewhat alarming that people make decisions and do this based on limited facts and limited information that they may receive. I would encourage anybody to go to the sheriff's office website and look at. We post on YouTube the full videos of news conferences with every detail given. Facts, knowledge is power.
Director Hackney, just to follow up, how would you describe the climate in the community, especially maybe on the northwest side? climate between police and the community?
We, like I said to one of the other questions, Jacksonville is a unique place, and the sheriff's office truly has a unique relationship with all segments of the community, but especially there. The segment that's there, it's no surprise. Any stat could look and see that's where the majority of violent crime that we have is. Those folks that live in those areas, that work in those areas, they deal with that on a daily basis. We enjoy a good rapport with them. I can tell you from some of the other facts that I deal with and other cases that I've had to deal with, we get many calls about the cases that are there that help us solve those cases. I don't think sheriff's office throughout the country receive that level of support. You know, you hear about the don't snitch mentality. I truly don't see it here. There may be some of that here, but in the overwhelming sense of what is the relationship that we have built over the years with the community, including those in the Northwest, is we're lucky to have that.
Dana Train, people in Cleveland Arms said they feel stereotyped. That's the way they feel the relationship is with the police. They feel that's. How do you address that? I mean, that's what they're saying. They say, you know, we feel like we've been stereotyped as criminals.
That's unfortunate to hear. I'm not saying that things are perfect, and there's certainly things that we could do and will continue to do in those neighborhoods to kind of close some of those gaps. But knowing that, we make efforts to work through
How
those
do you
things.
do that?
Gosh, through the Police Athletic League and some of the other programs that we have. You know, the Sheriff's Advisory Council is something that since Sheriff Rutherford has been in office and almost at the end of his 12 years now, has grown the Sheriff's Advisory Councils, including in those areas in Northwest Florida, Northwest Jacksonville, leaps and bounds. And that information sharing tool that they have through the SHADCOs is one way that we're closing some of those gaps.
There were 3 children in that apartment, and what about the decision to deploy the taser in the apartment when those children were present? I mean, they could have been, I don't know where they were in the apartment, they could have been, you know, within range too. What about that, making that decision for those children?
Well, again, you use a level of deference when you're deploying force, and certainly you're not going to deploy a taser or a firearm or any other level of force where you know that there is something that could be injured from it. If there's a child in the backdrop, you're certainly not going to use a taser. The need to stop him and stop his fleeing is paramount at that point in time. Obviously, 2 officers thought the exact same thing because they both deployed their tasers at him. But again, as we review in the future this incident, part of what we review is every response to resistance as part of this, and the use of their tasers would be a portion of what is reviewed in the future.
Denver Correction News.
You mentioned that he fired 6 bullets and hit the suspect 4. Do we know where the other 2 bullets happened to go, or?
The number 4 is kind of the best guess that the hospital was able to give us yesterday. There were actually several entry and exit wounds that they had. That was their best guess that they gave us. So we will look to make that determination where the other went. Sometimes you're not able to tell. You know, his backdrop was ultimately the ground and the wall behind him. So we do, it's just a matter of course, the best we can to make a determination of where every shot went, what every shot hit. So
This is the 3rd police-involved shooting in less than 3 weeks. What's the level of concern with that?
My concern is that for this time in 3 weeks, we've had 3 incidents where people haven't complied with officers' orders where they could have and avoid themselves being in officer-involved shootings and been shot. That leaves me concerned. That leaves me concerned that we're not able to gain compliance where we can. Again, like outlined before, that's what we want. Just obey with our orders. You have other avenues of redress through the criminal justice system if you feel like you've been unlawfully arrested. But to fight an officer, to flee from an officer, to shoot at an officer, there is no time or place where that's okay.
Are there things officers can do to maybe gain that compliance in a different manner?
That's hard to say. I mean, you know, here yesterday was an incident where Mr. Jones, upon being caught, could have been man enough to give himself up then. But for whatever reason, in Mr. Jones' head, he decided that that wasn't the thing to do. Now, whether he didn't like going to jail again, which he's been there several times, that could be it. But whatever reason, Mr. Jones made a conscious decision to say, you know what? I'm not going to put my hands behind my back. I'm not going to be handcuffed. I'm going to run. And despite you telling me time after time after time to stop and give up, which a normal, law-abiding citizen would do, he chose not to do it. Now, let's go back before that. He didn't even have to lay hands on the mother of his children. He made a conscious decision at that point in time. That's probably the best way I can say to avoid these things is to not break the law. Don't batter your spouse, you know? And when the officer tells you to stop, I recommend to do it. And when he says put your hands behind your back, I recommend do that. And when you're running from him and he says stop then, I recommend that. And I certainly don't recommend kicking in doors of other people who you don't live at and going in their apartment. And when he says stop there, I think he means stop. Compliance is what we seek. Compliance will find you not injured.
Any other questions?
All right. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you very much.